and thank you all for joining us this morning. We are delighted to be partnering with the Embassy of Mexico to celebrate International Women's Day. As you may already know, Mexico and France are co-hosting the 2021 Summit Generation Equality Forum. It is a topic that is near and dear to our heart, and I'm glad that we got to partner on this event and bring a small part of this discussion to Washington, D.C. already today. Joining us on stage are four incredible women. Alice Albright, CEO Global Partnership for Education. I had the honor to work with Alice for the last replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education. It was in Dakar a couple of years ago. Janet Murguia, President and CEO UnidosUS, a powerful voice for the Latinos. Cecile Richards, activist and co-founder of Supermajority and former president of the Parenthood. I also had the opportunity to talk to Cecile on those activities for the voting rights in particular, and Teresa Romero, President, United Farm Workers, the first Latina and immigrant to become the president, immigrant women to become president of a national union in the United States. Leading the discussion is Steve Clemons, editor-at-large at The Hill, a longtime friend of our embassy and a great supporter of our French series. Thank you, Steve. Before I hand it over to Ambassador Moctezuma, I wanted to announce the theme of our April French series, which will be titled Notre Dame, Rebuilding a Legacy. As we near the second anniversary of the fire at Notre Dame, we will dedicate the event to the ongoing rebuilding efforts and the incredible generosity of American friends and contributors. And now, without further ado, I will leave the stage to Ambassador Moctezuma, and I also want to take this opportunity to welcome here in Washington our new Mexican colleague. Thank you very much to all of you.
Ambassador to the United States of America. I don't take this just as luck, but as a commitment. I have always embraced joining the effort to make gender equality real in every corner of society. The Embassy of Mexico is proud to support this event where meaningful discussions can take place about issues as central, as relevant as gender equality. I hope that today I will learn, and we all will learn, new ideas on the matter. I want to thank Janet Murguia, President and CEO of UnidosUS, and Teresa Romero, President of the United Farm Workers, for accepting our invitation to share the perspectives of migrant women, and to Alice Albright, Cecile Richards, and the moderator Steve Clemons for rounding up this stellar panel. The COVID pandemic has showcased the fundamental role played by women around the world, and at the same time the structural struggles they have to face. We have to face together. Women make up the majority of the health professionals in the world, and have been standing in the front lines of hospitals facing the devastating effects of the crisis. I was the Minister of Public Education since 2018 and witnessed that women teachers are also the column that supports the learning process in Mexico's distance education. I also witnessed that in every home, it was the woman, the mother, who stands by the children's education. During the pandemic, the world could go on because of women. The efforts to achieve gender equality are never truly over. They require persistence because they are a constant work in progress. But now, what we face is a sense of urgency. Let's speed up the pace. This is why Mexico is so proud to co-host the 2021 Generation Equality Forum with France, as Ambassador Etienne just mentioned. Both countries have a clear and deep commitment in defense of gender equality, and we are confident that together we can achieve much more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm editor-at-large of The Hill, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you to Ambassador Moctezuma of the Embassy of Mexico and Ambassador Etienne, the Ambassador of France. We have a stellar panel, and we were going to get into this broad discussion. First of all, a happy International Women's Day to everyone. We have, of course, as the ambassador mentioned, Alice Albright of the Global Partnership for Education, Cecile Richards. I'm very happy to see she was able to join us, co-founder of Supermajority, Janet Murguia, good friend, president of UnidosUS, and Teresa Romero, the first female president, first woman president of the United Farm Workers. And it's great to have you all here. I think we've got Alice just joining us now. So let me open this up. You know, we're here today talking about gender equality. I think one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that when we have discussions like this, that we don't turn them into, let's check off the box, we had a gender equality day on International Women's Day. Don't we all feel good about that? And we have President Biden today, who has launched a new Gender Policy Council in the US government. Let me just open this up to Anne and just say that Gender Policy Council, as I've read it quickly, is about creating educational environments for women, looking at education for women, and keeping these environments safe from sexual violence. It's very compelling, but at the same time, I'm asking myself, is that enough? Is that the bar that we should be thinking about, the universe of things when it comes to thinking broadly about gender education? What would be on your dashboard? I really want to go to everyone, but let me start with Alice. Alice?
Thank you. Let me just make sure everyone can hear me.
You're great.
The lens, thank you very much. The lens that we look at this is through the situation in the developing countries. We work with between 90 countries and territories, very big picture. Even before the pandemic, there were significant education deficiencies, both in terms of access and in terms of quality. The pandemic has made that a lot worse. And the girls, there's a big chance that, you know, millions of girls will never, ever set foot in a classroom again. The reason why sort of a gender lens on this matters is not only because of the inequality, but we have to really take action that understands that. And this means hiring more female teachers, thinking about the hygiene issues, thinking about the safety issues, and gender-based violence, the curriculum issues. There's a range of it. So we can get to a little bit later in the conversation, but we have done quite a bit at GPE to really drill down on this. And for example, we've just set up a specific window for girls' education within our funding. We've also deployed $500 million to countries recently to help them recover from the pandemic, recover education, and a good chunk of that was also oriented to girls. And we've got some great opportunities this year between the Gender Equality Forum that Ambassador Etienne and Ambassador Moctezuma talked about, the G7, as well as our upcoming replenishment conference to really keep the issue top of the agenda. Because I think bottom line, there's no better way to recover from the whole pandemic situation that we're in to invest in girls' education.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, but let me just ask you just real quick to follow up. Do you think the Biden initiative right now announced today goes far enough?
Well, it's you know, all these things have to come together. You know, the Biden initiative, from my understanding, is somewhat more domestically oriented, and clearly there is a domestic problem. And I know that my co-panelists will go into that. in more depth because that's their area of expertise. So it's great that the Biden initiative, the Biden administration is putting that on the agenda and at the level that they are. So yes, but there's also an enormous problem internationally, and the international community, starting with the G7, needs to realize also what a problem it is internationally for lots of reasons. We can get into it, and keep it also on the international agenda. So both are necessary, domestic and international.
Janet, let me ask you, what how you look at the roster of priorities that need to be moved. I mean, I find this discussion so important because what we're really talking about is dismantling bias, dismantling systemic bias against gender and women, and a real problem that societies have of just getting the equality. We're looking at people where they are, and not only that, also recognizing, when we get to Teresa Romero and Cecile in a moment, but recognizing that there have been whole sections of society that have been discriminated against for so long, they don't start at the same place. So Janet, I'd love to kind of, as we think about what needs to be moved when it comes to gender justice, really, where do we need to move it?
Sure. Steve, it's wonderful to be here today with these incredible colleagues on this distinguished panel. I really appreciate the invitation. And I just want to say, for us at UnidosUS, we're the largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the United States. And our mission for over 50 years now has been to address systemic inequalities and to promote opportunities for everyone, including the Latino community. Latinas have been a big part of that focus. But I would just say, to get to your first question, look, I think it's a huge and momentous first step for the Biden administration to set up this task force on gender equity, and also think about who the leaders are in this space for the White House. I think it's incredibly exciting to know that not only Jen Klein, someone who's been working in this space for a long time, but now Ambassador Julissa Reynoso, who's the chief of staff for Jill Biden, has a lot of extensive experience, both not just domestic, but internationally. And of course, both are going to be working very closely with the Domestic Policy Council, which is run by Susan Rice. So I do think you're going to have this intersection of gender equity, looking at policies that are not just domestic, but I think increasingly there will be a vigilance for looking at that intersection with more global issues. So I think it's an exciting first step, and I really do commend President Biden for having this sort of insight to do this. But you're right, Steve, we need racial equity to be a lens as well. And there are going to be opportunities, and we've already been pushing as part of a coalition, the need to make sure that in the same way we're looking at gender equity, we're looking at racial equity across the administration, across departments, so that we can begin to identify what those systemic barriers are and how we can better leverage the leadership of the White House, who is very committed. We've heard President Biden talk in a very compelling way about the importance of this and addressing it. So now we can see that leadership and the leverage of the White House to go across all these departments and bring that lens across all of our policies. And of course, that impacts all of our departments, including the State Department. So I'm encouraged by the domestic focus, and I think the opportunity for international focus on this.
Teresa, we had a nice little pre-chat I should share with you. Teresa said, ask me about farm workers and I could talk for hours. So let me ask you about farm workers and, the kind of element of that dimension, as Ambassador Moctezuma just said, about immigrants who've come into this country, about gender justice, gender equality, and gender barriers, frankly. Give us your take on that. And I want to recognize you as the first woman president of United Farm Workers. So progress a little bit.
A little bit, yes. A step forward, Steve. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies, for being here. It's an honor for me to be here with you. I believe that we talk about it, we say things, we take steps, but we need to stick. You said it at the beginning, Steve. We need to stick with it. We need to make sure that progress is going to be made. We cannot talk about it once a year and then come back the next year and have the same discussion. I see with in the fields with farm worker women, they are the backbone of the family. They work in the fields. They are the ones that are making sure the kids, as much as they can, are getting, the education that they need. They sometimes go to a job that they have performed somewhere else, that they have the experience for, and they're denied that job. And the next day, we have done it. Send a man to apply for the same job, and he gets it. So it was sometimes in sexual harassment in the fields, in the things that women have to put up is something that is unheard of. We hear it, what's happening in Hollywood. But I can tell you without a doubt that women nowadays are experiencing challenges at work, at home, with the family. And now that they are considered essential workers during the pandemic, continue to work day in and day out, exposing themselves so they can put food on our tables. So sometimes people don't believe that there's a large percentage of women in the fields doing this very difficult job. But I can tell you that we are at probably 40, 50%, if not higher, of women who are working in the fields side by side with men, and in many cases not making as much as men are making.
Well, I mean, that is, I have to tell you, I mean, one of the things that you trigger when you say that at all levels, if you go from the farm workers and the people in the field to the corporate boards, you see an ongoing, I would call it, an epidemic of inequality when it comes to pay. And I just think we have to be honest about it. I've been at Davos every year for the last 10 years or so. They raise it as an issue, but I got to tell you, even at the highest levels of power, women are not treated as they are. So Cecile, let me ask you, and also just to reflect, because I mean, you're also the former president of Planned Parenthood Federation. So one of the things that's in the back of my mind are the social constraints that are imposed on women by others, and how we need to kind of make sure that remains part of the picture. So as you tell us how you look at this strategic challenge around gender equality, I also think there's an element of the structural constraints that are imposed and restricted on women that often don't become part of these discussions.
Sure, and thank you, Steve. It's awesome to be here with my sisters in this struggle, and I think each one of you touched on such important things. Alice, absolutely, if we don't address girls' education globally, but also, of course, the losses that we've seen this year because of the pandemic. Janet's linking of the issues of race and gender are so important because, as we know, and Steve used equal pay as an example, yes, we have unequal pay, but we have really unequal pay when it comes to Black and brown women in this country. And so everything has to be addressed in a sort of in that framework. And certainly, to Teresa's point, that this pandemic, whether it's farm workers, whether it's service workers, whether it's educators, frontline healthcare providers, it has hurt women and women of color the most. So, but I would just say, like, sort of top line, I feel like we are at this this sort of inflection moment. And you mentioned, one of the things that President Biden just did, but certainly this new pandemic, this new recovery package has all the elements of some of the systemic change we need. Is what I feel like I've seen over the years is we actually know a lot of the things that need to be done to address the issues we're talking about. We just haven't had the political will to demand it. And one of the things that has dramatically changed is that women are now running for office and getting elected and demanding change. And we saw that obviously in the election of Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president, the first woman of color vice president. We've seen historic numbers of women and women of color now in the Biden-Harris cabinet. So the opportunity for this to not just be a day or a proclamation is that we can now embed a completely different sort of point of view in all the policies. And I guess the one that has been touched on that hasn't really been, that I would like to kind of throw into the mix here is women now, and this is just in the U.S. I realize this is a global, the global conversation, but I think it's emblematic of what's happening. Women in the United States a year ago were basically half the workforce, right? We are now at 1988 levels of women's engagement in the economy. All of the areas where we've been hit the hardest in this economic downturn and the effects of COVID have been felt by women educators, women in the service sectors, women in retail. It is going to take huge change, systemic change, and investment to turn that around. Because if we're going to spend the next 30 years just trying to kind of get back to where we were, that's not going to be adequate. And so I say, as we look at what's the investments that were made, obviously on a completely partisan, basis in this recovery package, we are beginning to address those systemic issues: childcare, investment in public education, investment in healthcare, things that we need for women to ever be able to actually begin to get back to where we were and actually imagine equal opportunity in our economy.
If I could,
thank you for that.
Steve,
Oh yeah, go ahead, Janet.
Steve, I'm just going to build on
Sure.
Cecile's comments, just because I think it's so important to focus on this particular moment, because our polling has showed that for Hispanics, over half of our community has lost jobs, wages, business due to the pandemic. But for Latinas, the effect has been even more devastating because of what Cecile says. Half of Latinas work in 3 occupations: service, domestic, and hospitality. And those areas have suffered the greatest loss of jobs. And while Latinas make up only 16% of all workers, 45% of all jobs lost in December were in those jobs held by Latinas. The economic devastation, the way that our families, and in particular Latinas within our families who are serving in essential roles, have just been crushed. It's why initiatives, major, bigger, bolder thinking like the American Rescue Plan are going to be so necessary. But even then, we're going to have long-term effects on this, and we're going to have to be vigilant. And it's why representation in those decision-making roles becomes so important, whether as elected leaders or leading agencies that are going to be making some of these decisions. What Cecile has said is true, and we have to build on that.
I think if I could jump in, I think there's a real opportunity for U.S. leadership, both domestically and internationally, on this point. And I'm delighted with what the Biden administration has announced. If you look at the situation internationally, the gains that have been made in education over the past 2 decades for girls have been wiped out by the pandemic. And so the impact, and what does that mean for recovery? It means that the recovery is going to be stalled and a lot slower for the poorest countries on the globe. So this is a chance for the Biden administration, wearing its hat of "we're back," to come in and say, we've got to start investing in those things that are going to really make a difference for recovery. And also keep on the hat of what matters domestically and internationally. There's nothing better than investing in education as a way of beginning to reverse the damage of the pandemic. And this means skills, it means teachers, it means safety, it means hygiene across the board. And recovery packages, stimulus packages, can be the lens through which they do that. So the U.S. has a real opportunity right now to reset how people think about the role that public service plays and how important it is to our recovery, and really taking on a leadership position around that. And with the G7 coming up, there's a chance.
And Steve, one of the things that we have experienced for many, many years is that men assume what we women want and need. But I think we're at a point that we are the ones that need to say what we want and need. Nobody can say it for us. They need to talk to us. They need to hear from us. They need to hear from all women, whatever they are, whatever work that they do, what it is that they need, what it is that is important to them. We don't want anybody telling us what it is that we want and how they're going to solve our problems. We are part of this. We are the solution. We need to be part of. We need to be at the table, and our voices need to be heard.
Do you think, Teresa, and just all of you, Cecile, that what we're seeing evolve with just what Teresa was saying is that you don't need people mansplaining these things. That people are feeling empowered. That investment in education is happening. I'd like to go back to what Alice said, because I guess my slightly different view, I don't think it's inconsistent with what you said, is I worry about the international scene like you do, that the gains that have been made have been wiped out and rolled back in so many places because of the pandemic. But what happens is that that's also a political thing, that people have seen those rights roll back, and you worry about that becoming reified, that failure to advance women's empowerment at that moment and having that roll back is something that in other parts of the world can be. I also worry about this country. So while I'm very, very heartened by what I see, do you believe that when you see the women of color, and the gender equity that President Biden has brought to you, do you think that can, whether, let's think 8 years ahead, maybe we don't have a Democratic administration in place, does that then become something that you feel is secure in this country? Is it secure in Mexico? I mean, what do we need to do to make sure that the presence of women and the empowerment of women isn't a temporary passing phase?
It's not
Cecile?
secure anywhere.
Right. So, yeah, right. None of the rights we've ever, look at the Voting Rights, look at Voting Rights Act. There's so many things you could look at and say that was a hard fought battle, and it's always tenuous. And certainly we can talk about reproductive rights and abortion rights, the same thing. I do think that what is encouraging and what women in the U.S. in particular need to understand is 100 years after the beginning of suffrage, literally last August, and even though suffrage, of course, was an imperfect movement that left many women behind, today in the U.S., women are the majority of voters. Women determined the Democratic primary, and Joe Biden probably, or President Biden, excuse me, I think would give credit to Black women in particular in several states who really sort of, lifted his candidacy at critical moments. We looked at in the November turnout, women were an overwhelming majority of voters, and the issues that they cared about, COVID, racial inequity in this country, and the economic, situation, those were the major issues of the election. Those were issues of which women voted on, and they determined what happened. And so I do think it is imperative that for women, we can't only kind of get ourselves back together, deal with our kids, deal with all the issues we're talking about. We have to be voters. We have to demand voting reform that allows women to vote. And thank goodness for folks like Stacey Abrams who've been, really devoted their lives to this. But we have to be able to ensure that women can continue to be a political force in this country, unless otherwise, I believe, yes, we can very easily see our progress rolled back.
Alice, I know you were going to jump in as well.
No, I couldn't agree more about, we're at what I call a crossover moment. I think that if you look at rights for women domestically, they are under attack. And, you need to look at voting rights, you need to look at Me Too, you need to look at pay equity, you need to look at, what are the numbers on, representation in the Senate and the House and corporate boards and other places of power. It is clearly a problem in the United States. And I think that we are fooling ourselves if we think otherwise. If you take that level of problem and you look at what it is in the developing world, it is significantly worse, and for all kinds of reasons. And so there's a crossover moment that we have where we have to stand back and realize that we're not going to make progress either in the United States or internationally unless we start really digging into the issues facing women. And this starts with, is there equitable access to healthcare? Is there equitable access to education? What are the societal issues that are holding women back? What are the voting rights and other sort of forms of democracy holding people back? Representation in labor unions that I'm sure my panelist colleagues would think about. Access to sexual and reproductive rights on all the things that fall under that, whether or not it's contraceptives or education. So there's a huge agenda here, and we need to prosecute it both domestically and internationally. And if we think that we are all of a sudden in this world where everything is okay, we're wrong. We've actually rolled back in many, many ways over the past years.
If I could build on that and
Sure.
everybody's comments, look, if we've learned anything, whether it's over the last 4 years or certainly what January 6th taught us, is how fragile our democracy is and how fragile any gains we've made in the areas of gender equity or racial equity. If anything, it's uncovered how much more to do we have to do. And to me, to get to your answer to your question, Steve, is look, we've not secured all the empowerment we need to secure. We need to keep building on it, and we need to be smart about how we do it. When we do have the power, we need to make the decisions that will continue to deepen that work. So passage of the American Rescue Plan, making sure we're leveraging those dollars into the job training and skills and protections for some of these women who have been most exposed in this pandemic is going to be incredibly important. You know, Latinos right now are the fastest cohort of entrepreneurs in this country. And I think it's true for women generally in terms of our entrepreneurial spirit. But that's not going to continue to happen on its own. We need to make the right investments, and we need to make sure that as we look at women and we're in a position to make decisions that can impact pay and wages. I mean, Latinas make only 54 cents to every dollar made by white men still today. That's a fact. So we have a lot more to do, but the key is to make sure that while we have the ability to create decisions and make decisions and move resources in the right places, that we're doing it to further empower women and to further address these systemic, not just gender, but racial inequalities that we know still exist.
Right. Teresa, did you want to jump in real quick?
I agree with everything that has been said. I think this is an uphill battle. I don't think this is by any means something that we have achieved. We're far from it. And we need to continue. To me, like Cecile said, is having women in positions that they're going to make decisions for all of us, but voting. Our right to vote is in danger, and we need to make sure that we protect it. And we need to make sure that we show up at the voting places to make her choices, who's going to be representing us.
I should tell everyone that if you raise your hand, Zoe Klein will gather your question. I think we're going to bring some people on in just a moment to ask questions. Let me just, ask this one quick question right now. As you sort of look at education and to come back to Alice's world, I've spent a lot of time with Alice's mother and this sort of talking about rights and education and women in the world. And she's got such a great map of what's needed, but talked about the United States in a way. I know this is a global forum, but said one of the key bits of secret sauce of what made America great was immigrants. We were all immigrants, everyone coming in. And so that anchoring of rights earned, integration into a society that came in. And so I've always sort of seen this question of rights and civic and gender and other justice issues as part of what made it. But there's been a lot of tension on that front in this country lately around immigration, and it's no doubt, like Cecile just said, that some of that rights agenda is fragile. And I guess so. Just coming back to just starting with all of you, just very quick snapshots. How much are these the immigrant experience and integration of immigrants into this society completely connected to not only gender justice, racial justice, LGBTQ justice, economic justice, etc. So, Janet?
Sure, I'll start, and I know folks will want to add, but just think about this fact. There are 6 million U.S. citizen children in this country today who have one parent who is undocumented. If we want stability for the future and to make sure that those children and those families who are now part of mixed status families where someone in their family is undocumented,
right?
We need to address the issue of immigration. There's no question about it. But to get to your point, Steve, also it's incumbent on us to make sure that once we have immigrants in this country, that we recognize their value. And I think if anything, this pandemic has really shown a light that essential workers have stepped in at the cost of their very lives. And we have been disproportionately impacted in the number of deaths by COVID-19. to keep this economy going. Because as Teresa knows, it's not just been in the fields, but all across
everywhere,
but the food chain. If you look, it's the fields, it's the meat processing plants, it's the retail packaging plants, it's the people who are delivering the food to you, it's the folks who are caring for the folks in your home, whether they're children, anyhow, all across that food chain. So we need to make sure we understand the value that these folks continue to play, and make sure that as we create new citizens, and we need to do immigration reform, but that we're onboarding these new Americans in a way that's allowing them to even contribute further. And that's why we need these public-private sector investments in immigrant integration. I'm very encouraged by President Biden's announcement in February that they are going to create a new task force on new Americans in the White House under the auspices of the Domestic Policy Council to help coordinate efforts. Because if we're smart about this, we know that these people are going to be an asset to our country and to our economy at a time when we need to rebuild it the most.
Alice, let me just tweak this in a moment. I want to get to everyone, but just tweak it just for you in a moment. When it comes to global education, as you talked and you help invest in programs for girls around the world, is the American model of our immigration experience and our gender rights initiative compelling enough to help inspire action abroad, or is it wobbly because of what we've seen in recent years?
Well, I think it depends on how far you go back. I mean, there have been moments in our history where we've done some very laudable things, and both in terms of immigration and in terms of education policy. And I think we need to remember that. But we also need to remember that the circumstances facing the very lowest income countries are wholly different. And they're driven by poverty, by conflict, by the high level watermark of refugees in the world. Right now, there's 70 million refugees in the world and internally displaced people. So there is a localization of the issues. What we need to do on the international front is help countries provide educational capabilities to the refugees in their borders. There's all kinds of reasons for that. We also have to take a wide policy range of all the different interventions to help countries provide what they need in education for girls. And this is why you see this as a priority of the French government, as Ambassador Etienne said. It's why it's on the top of the list of the G7 upcoming under Prime Minister Johnson. It's why the gender equality work has focused so much on the low-income countries in the Beijing Plus 25 agenda. So I think that there is a localization, and there's not a one-size-fits-all. But people will also be looking to the U.S. for leadership, and I think that not only in sort of in the immediate kind of G7 future with Johnson. But also, what does the U.S. do on immigration? And I think that the U.S. is a beacon in many ways and can play a role in how people think about the issues, big picture.
Great. Let me get Teresa and Cecile on real quick.
Just it's notable to me. I was very flattered, and but increasingly, I'm being asked at UnidosUS. We have a network of community-based organizations that help basically onboard new Americans, do part of that immigrant integration work, support those immigrants so they can be able to contribute further. I have been asked by Japan, the U.S.-Japan Foundation, the U.S.-Spain Council, the German Foundation, and now the French Embassy to talk about how we do immigrant integration, because they see that as a growing need to build their economies. And they know that stability is going to be important, and that we've had to deal with that as a country here. They're having to deal with it in terms of once they let immigrants in, how are they going to make sure they're able to leverage them into the full contributors that we know they can be? Thanks. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Nala. Let me get quick snapshots from Teresa and Cecile, and I'm going to go to these questions. We've got some good questions lined up. But Teresa, your thoughts?
I think it's the fact that we are just here talking about it, and that we're talking about it international level, is a very good thing. The last probably few decades in this country, immigration has been seen as a bad thing, although we are a country of immigrants. The last 4 years have been even more difficult for immigrants But if you think about it, if we talk about all the essential workers that are here, continue to work during the pandemic, a great majority of them are immigrants, and a great majority of them are undocumented. So if we start looking at the reality of what immigration, and I'm assuming in every country, what the contributions are that they bring, we would really see it as a different thing. They are here performing, in many cases, jobs that most of us as U.S. citizens would not want to do.
Right.
So their contributions are enormous, and we need to recognize them.
Cecile, about this question of immigrants and rights?
Well, I'll just pick up on what maybe a slice of workforce that we haven't talked as much about, but is directly related to all this, and that is caregivers in the United States who are largely immigrants, and probably everyone on this panel and probably everyone in our audience has had some experience with the desperate need for well-paid, well-trained, secure jobs for people who are caregivers. In this pandemic, of course, it has just exposed how fragile this system is in the United States, but we need to guarantee a little bit. We need to guarantee, I think, a $15 an hour minimum wage. We need to guarantee training and benefits. We need to create a system where people can connect to folks who are looking for this work. We need a path to citizenship for this workforce, and we need their ability to organize collectively into unions, because this is growing. People want to keep their folks at home. They rather as long as they can. But this workforce is underpaid, overworked, and it's an investment that we need to make as a country.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you absolutely so glad you raised that. It's such a vital part of discussion, which often doesn't, again, make it into the conversation. Let me, I'm going to post these to different people because we won't have enough time for all four of us, but you feel free to jump in after I direct it. But we have for Teresa Romero from Andrea Salinas. What are the policies we should be advocating to strengthen and support women farm workers domestically and internationally? What would be a few of the things you think we could do that would be helpful on their front?
One of the things that we have been working on especially with President Biden, is immigration. Women are afraid to speak up. Why? Because they would lose their jobs. They would not be hired anywhere else. They need their income to help the family. Many of these women are single mothers. So what we need to do right now is immigration reform. There is a bill that can be passed that would benefit farm workers, that would benefit dreamers, that would benefit people with temporary protective status. And that is something that would really make a difference in women's lives, because then they would have a voice without the threat of being fired or deported.
Thank you. From G. Choi, and I'll direct this to all of you, from George Washington University. What are you excited or hopeful for about women in your workforce? I'll just say, let's broaden it. What are you excited or hopeful for about the women's agenda as we step forward? What are the kinds of things we can celebrate, look forward to that are positive? Cecile?
Well, I mean, it's sort of mentioned that I think I don't think we can overestimate the importance of the women who are now in leadership in this country. And it is, for many of us, it's such a dramatic change from the last 4 years.
Right.
I think that Janet Yellen is a labor economist who is now in charge of this country. This is huge. I mean, not only because of her gender, but because of her background. I think this fundamental commitment to investing in sort of rethinking the workforce so that being a woman is not a detriment is really, this is so long overdue. So I'm excited about that fact, and that some of the elements of this recovery package, I look forward to the day when we treat women workers and pregnant women equally, and so that becoming a parent is no longer a detriment for folks in the workforce. We have a long way to go, but I think we're just at a moment where we're beginning to reach some kind of equity in representation, and for me, it's a long time coming, but really exciting.
Janet, Murguia, the things you'd like to celebrate?
Well, you know, Cecile and I have talked about this before. I just tell you, this younger generation of women are teaching us, I think, more than we could teach them. They are fearless, they're bold, they're engaged, they're smart. And, you know, I'm just really excited when I see the women who work for me at UnidosUS, when I see the young women. This dreamer movement has been led in large part by women, young women. I mean, the future is really bright when we think about the assets that these young women bring, and the energy and the dynamism. And, you know, when we look at the last election, their willingness to engage, whether it was following Stacey Abrams or others in Arizona. We had a young woman leading an organization, a grassroots organization called Lucha, Alex Gomez. I mean, we have young women all over this country who are, and they're diverse and they're just incredible. And I feel like for some of us, you know, we learned in a different model of leadership. And, you know, I think, again, there's an opportunity for us to learn from these younger women. And I'm excited about this cohort of young women that are coming through the ranks.
Alice?
2 points. I think that the women's agenda is beginning to be not just a one-day-a-year thing. Mm-hmm. And we can't be happy if it becomes a 2-day-a-year thing and needs to be a 65-day-a-year thing, but it's beginning to move. So that's good. In my world, we see women heading up the European Union, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, and now the European Central Bank, just to name a few. And so we're beginning to, and in addition to, of course, the thing that brought tears to my eyes recently, which was Kamala Harris becoming our first woman and person of color vice president on the stage. So we're beginning to chip away a little bit at the leadership piece. So I think those are two things to celebrate, but we can't let it slip back. So 2 days a year is not good enough for me.
Teresa, let me, and as you answer this, Teresa, let me just, I know it's going to sound completely dated. You know, I'm an older guy, whatever. I kind of like old movies now. And so I was watching, it's going to sound silly, but I was watching the movie 9 to 5. I love Dolly Parton. I can't help it. And I see what's happening with Andrew Cuomo in New York and all this. And I'm like, well, you know, this struggle of having to, you know, of abuse that we've all seen going around in our society, in our firms, in education, in the military, is I guess that film from so many decades ago could run today as if it were just as contemporary as ever. I just want to be honest about it. I mean, I think a lot of progress has been made, but I just know that you're on the front lines fighting. So, I mean, some part of this is, what is the earnest agenda? And the second is, what are the bank shots, the reactions, you know, the bad players that need to be removed? It's part of the same package here to some degree. So I'm sorry to throw a movie in the middle of at the end of the show, but I mean, it really did impact me, that it's part of the struggle for gender justice and fairness and equity and everything. But we've been talking about this a long time.
But you know what, Stephen, yes, we've been talking for a long time. It's been happening for a long time. But for the first time, now we're listening to the victims. Before, the victims were afraid to speak because they knew nobody was going to listen to them. They knew they were going to say, well, you did something to earn that. And we're not there anymore. Right. So when now victims come and speak up against anybody, a boss who nobody knows or a president of this country, people are listening. And we need to continue to listen, and we need to continue to support them. So these type of abuses happen less and less. And we're empowering women, and we need to continue that. And it doesn't come, we women don't need to empower women. We all need to empower women to be able to speak up and to defend themselves and to say what happened to them so it doesn't happen to somebody else.
That's great. I've got 2 final questions here, which we can get through quickly. Cara Williamson asked, we've heard a lot about the negative impacts of COVID on women. What sorts of resources are out there to help get over that gap? Alice, you were addressing this.
So it's had a huge negative impact on women. Just to cite 2 resources that we have, we just deployed $500 million to 66 countries to help them get schools reopen and invest in distance learning. So that's a start. We also have, we're now in the process of raising $5 billion in our finance campaign. It'll be part of the G7. That money will go to countries to help them with education, and in particular, girls. There's a specific window within that that will be for girls' education. So those are two specific resources to call people's attention to in our world, and both coming up.
Thank you. Cecile, in Supermajority, has this been on your dashboard of I said diminishment of assets, job impacts, others, within this period, this last year of COVID and dealing with that? Has that been something on your priority roster? What are you doing to overcome some of those hits that your constituency has taken?
Sure.
Your constituency is really all of our constituency, but helping
right.
women, yes. So
yeah. I think it's for women. It's understanding that it's not their own personal failure that they're struggling right now. And I think we've had so many stories written about the systemic nature of what's happened. But I do think that the most important thing for me was in this first 100 days, what can we see out of in sort of a realignment in an administration about not just reopening bars, but reopening schools? What do we do about actually not just sort of bemoaning the fact, but actually addressing how women were going to get back to work, which includes investment in childcare. I mean, I've just looked at the numbers, and this is something that, again, Senator Elizabeth Warren has been fighting for, for forever. But I think this, assuming this bill gets signed, I think we're like putting in $39 billion into childcare, which is everything from direct support for families to actually sort of shoring up that industry. We can't have folks go back to work unless we have schools reopened and we have folks' ability to have their children taken care of. And then, of course, something we don't have time to get into now, but this tax credit for children is going to have an enormous impact on I have the numbers. It was like millions of children in this country. It's estimated we could actually reduce child poverty by 45%. These are the kinds of big, not little dinky investments, but the kinds of systemic investments we need for women and all families to be able to participate in the workforce. And I think that's important, Steve. And I know you're there, and this is not just good for women. It's not just good for families. It's not just good for children. It's good for our economy. And we cannot rebuild our economy unless we support women.
I can't thank you enough for framing it that way, because so many people look at these kinds of investments as giveaways or philanthropy or something to be nice or generous. And I'm like going, it's vital. I mean, it's way you create recurring returns in an economy. It's the way you create cohesion. It's the way you create increases in human capital. I mean, but I have to say that while I believe that, I know that is not something that has as fluid occurrence, is as widespread as it should be. Let me just go finally to Katie Bradley. Janet, what advice would you give to a young woman who just began her career?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I would say there's so many steps to take, but I would, Cecile wrote a great book. I would read her book and follow it to the T. But I would just say, Madam Secretary Albright's written books, everybody's written books. But I would just say, look, if anything, the last year has taught us anything, and I think the elections, is that we've got to speak up, show up, stand up. You've got to be present and engaged, and be willing to dive right in and not feel like you have to wait. We are already ready to do what we need to do as young women, as women. And it's so important just to find that purpose, match it with the cause, and get involved. I think I can't stress that enough. And to me, that's the most important thing I could tell folks. Get involved, be active, be engaged, be present, and do something, anything related to what you believe in.
Teresa Romero?
Be fearless. I know it is scary out there. I know. People are going to try to say you don't know anything, you're too young, you whatever, you're a woman, whatever it is. Be fearless. Don't listen to the negative comments. Find somebody who can mentor you, who can help you grow. But to me, fearless is key.
Alice Albright?
Yeah, I would agree. Don't give up. Find what you care about. Keep asking questions, and be incredibly persistent, and don't let anybody deter you, ever.
And Cecile, I'm going to give you the last word.
I would just say start before you're ready.
Great advice. And I would have said to anyone, male or female, young person starting their career, ask yourself, are you passionate about it? Life is too short to be doing things you really don't like. Do what you're passionate about. Don't let anybody get in your way. Ask a lot of questions. If you find a mentor who's helpful, great. If you find a mentor who holds you back, dump them. That's what I would say. So they're just not a mentor. Listen, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our two ambassadors, Ambassador Etienne from, of course, the Embassy of France, and Ambassador Moctezuma, the Ambassador of Mexico, for helping to discuss gender justice globally. And my excellent, I really love this. I wish we can do. Let's come back and not do it on International Women's Day. Let's do it on not the second day or the third day, but let's do it on the 75th day out there or something and come back. But Alice Albright, President of Global Partnership for Education, Cecile Richards, Co-founder of Supermajority, Janet Murguia, President of UnidosUS, and Teresa Romero, President of United Farm Workers. Thank you so much. I'm Steve Clemons of The Hill. That concludes our program today, and really want to thank everyone for joining us today for this edition of the French series.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay well.
Gracias.